Good morning, friends. It is so good to gather together with you here today as the month of April reaches its close. It's starting to look a lot like spring outside. We've had a lot of April showers these past few hours, and it's good to gather. As we do this week, I'm thinking about my stacks of books. I've been trying to consolidate some of them. I don't know if you're anything like me or not, but I wind up with books scattered all over the house that I'm in the middle of reading. Some folks are one book at a time, start to finish, don't pick up another until you're done. And while I've tried that before, that's normally not how I operate. I often wind up with a whole stack of books. This is one of my stacks that I gathered from several spots in the house. And you might be a little like me, maybe you're not, but some folks have lots of different books on lots of different things going on at once. Like in my stack right now, I've got a cookbook here, and it's got lots of tabs of recipes that either I want to try or maybe my youngest child and I might try cooking together. I've got a historical novel about two queens in the Dark Ages that looks to be a kind of fascinating read. I've got one that I started while I was recovering from surgery and haven't gotten too far in yet on listening to the wisdom of our bodies. I've got another one that came in during that time as well, that peace is a practice. And to be honest, I need to pick this one up a little more here in these past few weeks. I've got my Bible. I've got another new book that I'm diving into. And I just thought this morning I would share a few things that caught my attention from those piles of reading. And the first one is from my Bible, from Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes 3, this is a familiar passage to many of us. There's a song that's based on this. There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And one of the things I like about that particular passage is we get that acknowledgement in there that we are often see many different things happening all at once. These different times don't always match different decades of life or different seasons in a calendar. Sometimes they're happening side by side in the same day. And that can make things a little challenging. And along those lines, something really stood out from one of the other books that I'm reading right now. It's this one. I guess I haven't learned that yet. It's by Shauna Nyquist. And one of the things she talks about is how we often feel like life ought to look a certain way. We ought to know a certain amount of things. We need to have things a certain way. And that sometimes when life doesn't match up to that, we wonder if we failed. She tells a story about her kids starting a new school in a different part of the country, and they kept bumping into things that they were not familiar with. And they had to learn the phrase, I guess I haven't learned that yet. And she realized that it was very appropriate for her as an adult as well. She moved from the Midwest to New York City, and there was a lot to learn. How to take the subway, how to grocery shop on foot, things that she'd never had to do before. And so this phrase, I guess I haven't learned that yet, was a way of showing compassion to herself. It's a way for her children to show compassion to themselves. And she went on to talk about how researchers have begun researching self-compassion. And what does it mean when instead of beating ourselves up for the things that we don't know or that we don't get quite right, what if we can extend grace to ourselves? Um, that's our Christian Bible language for it, right? Grace. And they've discovered that this grace, this self compassion, when we can do that, it brings about lasting change in our lives far more than shame or guilt or that self loathing ever could. And then it's when we feel loved, not only by others, but also by God, by ourselves, that we can find the courage to change. It unlocks our ability to move forward and grow. And so she suggests one of the best ways to start practicing self compassion is to tap into the kindness you show other people. So many of us are voices of love for the other people in our lives, and it's when we learn to speak with that same voice of love to ourselves that we're able to make meaningful change. Self compassion, that grace is learning to say, I guess I haven't learned that yet. I guess I haven't mastered that yet. I guess I still need to practice that. Whatever that is, maybe it's the peace we need to practice. Maybe it's even our expectations for ourselves and others. She goes on to talk about the fact that our lives are so interconnected that it's really hard to separate one piece from another, and that we always carry around our whole selves, both the parts that we like, the parts we don't, our pasts and our presents, our futures, our loves and our limitations. All those things are all wrapped up together. And so, what do we do in the middle of that? It might be easier if we could simply say, this isn't the time for that. It might be easier if our griefs and our joys didn't happen in such close proximity to one another. And so, what do we do? Well, she suggests we pay attention. We accept the world as it is, not as we wish it were, and we practice. We build rhythms of health and faith and grounding, ways of living that show self compassion and allow our best selves to emerge. We help each other, and we keep on the lookout for signs of hope, for sacred moments and divine fingerprints, even when the landscape around us feels desolate and quiet. So, friends, as you go into these days ahead, may you look for signs of hope. May you find them and grab onto them and live into them as you show yourself grace. Go in peace, friends, and I'll see you next week.